My son sent me a text message on my 65th birthday that broke my heart but saved my bank account. He wrote, "Dad, stop calling us. Don't expect us to take care of you in your old age because I have my own life and family now. Sell your big house and check yourself into a nursing home." I read the message twice, took a sip of my scotch, and walked to my wall safe. He didn't know that the house he told me to sell was the only thing keeping him out of prison. He didn't know that the luxury life he was living was funded by loans he had forgotten he signed. I didn't get mad. I just opened my ledger and decided to call in his debts. My name is Douglas Reed, and this is the story of how I taught my ungrateful son that the Bank of Dad is officially closed. Before I continue, tell me in the comments if you think parents owe their adult children an inheritance, or if respect must be earned. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that justice is a dish best served cold. It was raining in Seattle, a relentless gray drizzle that tapped against the windows of my 4-bedroom colonial house like a nervous finger. Inside, the silence was heavy. It was the kind of silence that accumulates in a house when you have lived alone for 5 years. Today was my 65th birthday. I had not expected a party. I knew my wife Catherine was gone, and she was the one who used to fill this house with balloons and the smell of roasting chicken. But I had expected a call. Just 5 minutes. Just the acknowledgement that I was still breathing. I sat in my leather armchair, the one facing the fireplace where no fire burned. On the small side table sat my phone, black and silent. I had checked the volume 3 times to make sure I hadn't missed a notification. I hadn't. At 7 in the evening, the screen finally lit up. My heart did a pathetic little jump in my chest. I reached for it, my hands steady. I was a structural engineer for 40 years. I built bridges that withstood earthquakes. My hands do not shake. It was a text from Brandon. Not a call. Not a video chat with my grandson Leo. Just a block of text. I put on my reading glasses and focused on the words. "Dad, Monica and I have been talking. You are reaching retirement age officially today. We want to set some boundaries now to avoid awkwardness later. Don't expect us to take care of you or invite you to live with us when you get too old. I have my own life, my own family, and my own financial pressure. You need to be realistic. Sell your house, use the money to pay for a facility, and don't become a burden on us. Happy birthday." I read it once. Then I read it again out loud, my voice sounding raspy in the empty room. Happy birthday. That was the kicker. He had buried the knife in my chest and then pasted a greeting card sticker on the handle. I looked around the living room. I looked at the grand piano that Brandon had learned to play on the lessons, costing me $300 a month for 6 years. He hadn't touched a key since he was 18. I looked at the mantel where a photo of his college graduation sat. I paid for that degree. I paid for the dorm where he partied, the books he didn't read, and the fraternity fees that bought him friends. A normal father might have cried. A weaker man might have called his son begging for clarification, asking what he had done wrong. But I felt a strange transformation happening inside me. The heat of shame that had started to rise in my neck suddenly cooled. It froze. The engineer in me took over. I was looking at a structural failure. When a bridge shows signs of collapse, you don't weep over the concrete. You condemn it. You restrict access. You cut your losses. I set the phone down gently. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I poured myself 2 fingers of the single malt scotch I had been saving for a special occasion. I suppose this was special. It was the day my illusions died. I took a sip, letting the burn settle in my chest. Then I walked into my study. This room was my sanctuary. It smelled of old paper and lemon polish. Behind the heavy oak desk was a painting of the Seattle skyline. I swung the frame aside. Behind it sat a steel wall safe. I spun the dial. Left to 32, right to 10, left to 55. The tumblers clicked with a satisfying mechanical precision. The heavy door swung open. Inside, there were no stacks of cash. I didn't believe in keeping cash where it could burn. Instead, there were documents. Stacks of them. Most people looked at me and saw a retired engineer living on a pension. They saw an old man driving a 5-year-old Ford truck. Even Brandon thought I was just getting by. He thought I was sitting on a nest egg that was slowly cracking. He was wrong. I reached into the safe and pulled out a thick black leather binder. I placed it on my desk and switched on the green banker's lamp. The light pooled on the cover. This was my ledger. 5 years ago, when I sold my shares in the construction firm, I walked away with $4 million after taxes. I never told Brandon. I wanted him to build his own character. I wanted him to work hard like I did. I failed. I opened the binder. Inside were plastic sleeves, and in each sleeve was a document. These weren't just sentimental scraps of paper. They were promissory notes. Legal binding, notarized promissory notes. I turned to the first page. It was dated 10 years ago. Brandon had just graduated. He needed a car to show his clients he was a serious real estate agent. He wanted a Porsche Cayenne. I told him a Toyota was reliable. He told me image was everything. Monica, his girlfriend at the time, had sneered at my truck. So I bought him the Porsche. $80,000. But I made him sign. I remembered the moment clearly. He was laughing, dangling the keys, barely reading the paper I slid across the table. "Dad, why do we have to be so formal?" he had asked. I told him that business was business. He signed it with a flourish, a messy scrawl that looked arrogant on the page. I ran my finger over the signature. Promissory note 001. Principal amount $80,000. Interest rate 2%. I turned the page. The wedding. Oh, that wedding. Monica wanted a vineyard in Napa Valley. She wanted imported orchids and a live string quartet. I suggested a nice church ceremony here in Seattle. She cried. She told Brandon I was ruining her dream. Brandon came to me, eyes downcast, asking for help. I wrote the check. $150,000. Promissory note 005. Signed by both Brandon and Monica. They were so drunk on champagne they probably thought it was a guest book. I kept turning the pages. The down payment on their penthouse. The bailout, when Brandon's credit card maxed out after their trip to Europe. The seed money for Monica's failed boutique business. I stopped at the last page. It was from 6 months ago. Brandon had come to me sweating pale. He had gambled on a risky real estate flip and lost. He needed $50,000 to cover the gap, or he would lose his license. I gave it to him. I looked at the total at the bottom of my spreadsheet. $482,500. That was the principal. With the accrued interest, it was over $500,000. But the money wasn't the weapon. The weapon was a small paragraph at the bottom of every single note. Clause 4, Section B. I adjusted my glasses and read it aloud to the empty room. The lender, Douglas Reed, reserves the right to demand full repayment of the principal and accrued interest at any time for any reason. This note is callable on demand. Upon receipt of a formal demand letter, the borrower has 30 days to settle the debt in full before legal proceedings and asset seizure commence. Callable on demand. Brandon had never read the fine print. He thought these were just formality papers to make his old man feel important. He thought I was a soft touch, a safety net that would always be there to catch him. I looked at the phone again. The text message was still there, glowing faintly. Don't expect us to take care of you. I closed the ledger. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. You want to talk about independence, son. You want to talk about having your own life, fine. Let's see how much of a life you have when the bank forecloses on it. I didn't go to bed. I didn't sleep. Instead, I pulled a fresh sheet of paper from my printer tray. I sat down and uncapped my fountain pen. I began to draft a letter. It wasn't a letter to my son. It was a letter to my lawyer, Mr. Holloway. I wrote with a steady hand. Dear Holloway, please prepare the necessary filings to activate Clause 8 of the Reed Family Trust immediately. Remove Brandon Reed as a beneficiary. Secondly, I am attaching copies of 15 promissory notes. I want you to issue a formal demand letter for the total amount to be sent to Brandon's office by courier on Monday morning. I paused. I looked at the photo of Leo, my grandson, on the corner of the desk. He was the only innocent one in this mess. I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it down. If I didn't cut the rot out now, Leo would grow up to be just like his father. Entitled, weak, cruel. I continued writing. If payment is not received within 30 days, initiate foreclosure proceedings on all collateral, including his primary residence and personal vehicles. I signed my name, Douglas Arthur Reed. The sun was starting to rise over Seattle. The gray light filtered through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of being a father is heavy, especially when you are carrying a child who refuses to walk. But the burden of being a creditor, that is simple. It is just math. I walked to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. The text message from Brandon no longer hurt. In fact, I was almost grateful for it. He had finally given me the permission I needed to stop being his father and start being his teacher. He wanted me to sell my house. He wanted me to disappear into a nursing home so he could wait for me to die and inherit the rest. I took a sip of black coffee. It was bitter and hot. Monday was going to be a very interesting day for the real estate market in Seattle. My son was about to learn that when you burn a bridge, you better make sure you are not standing on it. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of the Rainier Tower was silent and fast. My ears popped as the doors slid open, revealing the polished marble lobby of Holloway and Associates. This was a place where fortunes were protected and lives were dismantled, usually with the stroke of a very expensive pen. I walked past the receptionist who knew me by name, clutching my black leather ledger against my chest like a shield. I wasn't here today to build a bridge or design a foundation. I was here to demolish the ground my son was standing on. Robert Holloway was waiting for me. We had been friends for 30 years, since the days when I was a site manager, and he was a public defender with holes in his shoes. Now he wore Italian suits and had eyes that had seen every variety of human greed imaginable. He didn't offer me coffee. He saw the look on my face and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. He sat behind his mahogany desk, a fortress of glass and steel, with a view of the city that Brandon so desperately wanted to own. I didn't say a word. I just unlocked my phone and slid it across the desk to him. The text message from Brandon was glowing on the screen. Holloway put on his reading glasses. He read it in silence. His expression didn't change. He didn't gasp or shake his head. He just let out a long, slow breath through his nose, the kind of sound a doctor makes when he sees a tumor on an X-ray. He pushed the phone back to me, so he set his voice low and gravelly. It begins. I nodded. I told him that I was done waiting. I told him that the time for lectures and warnings was over. I placed the black ledger on his desk. Holloway opened it. He flipped through the pages of the promissory notes, his eyes scanning the dates, the amounts, and the signatures. He stopped at the note for the Porsche. He paused at the note for the wedding. He lingered on the note for the penthouse down payment. Then he looked up at me, a small, sharp smile playing on his lips. "You kept them," he said. "You actually kept them all." I told him that I never threw away a contract. Holloway closed the book and leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "Douglas," he said, "do you understand what you are holding here? This isn't just a list of loans. This is a nuclear option. Most parents give money to their children and call it a gift. They might say it is a loan, but they never document it. They never notarize it. And when the kid walks away, the parent has no legal standing. But this is different." He tapped the leather cover of the book. These are demand notes, Douglas. Do you remember what I told you when we drafted these templates 10 years ago? I told you that the acceleration clause is the most dangerous weapon in contract law. Clause 4, Section B. It means you don't have to wait for him to miss a payment. You don't have to wait for him to go broke. You can demand full repayment of the entire principal plus interest simply because you feel like it. I asked him to explain the process. I needed to hear it. I needed to know exactly what was going to happen to my son. Holloway stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the rainy streets of Seattle. Here's exactly how it works, he said, turning back to face me. We draft a formal demand letter today. We cite every single note in this book. We calculate the interest compounded annually at the federal minimum rate, just to be generous, which brings the total to just under $500,000. We send this letter via certified mail to his office, not his home. His office. We want his secretary to sign for it. We want the timestamp. He paused, letting the weight of the strategy sink in. Once that letter is signed, the clock starts ticking. 30 days, Douglas. He has exactly 30 days to write you a check for $482,000. If he doesn't, and we both know he can't, he is in default. On day 31, we file a motion for summary judgment. Because these notes are notarized and the signatures are valid, there is no trial. There is no jury. The judge looks at the paper, sees the debt, and bangs the gavel. I asked him what happens after the judgment. Holloway walked back to his desk and leaned over, his eyes locking onto mine. That is when the fun begins. We get a writ of execution. That gives the sheriff the authority to seize assets to satisfy the debt. We freeze his bank accounts. We garnish his wages. We put a lien on that fancy penthouse he loves so much. And since the penthouse is likely mortgaged to the hilt, our lien triggers a default with his mortgage lender. The bank will foreclose on him before we even have to lift a finger. He sat down, his voice dropping to a whisper. We will strip him, Douglas. We will strip him of his credit score, his assets, his reputation, and his ability to borrow a single dime from anyone in this country for the next 7 years. He won't be able to rent an apartment. He won't be able to lease a car. He will be financial dust. I looked at the ledger. I thought about Brandon when he was 5 years old, learning to ride a bike. I remembered the way he used to look at me like I was the strongest man in the world. I remembered the day I taught him to tie his shoes. A wave of nausea hit me. Was I really going to do this? Was I really going to destroy my own son's life over a text message? I looked at Holloway. I told him that maybe this was too much. Maybe I should just cut him off from the will and leave it at that. Maybe I should just let him drift away. He is still my boy. Robert. He is still the kid I carried on my shoulders. Holloway didn't blink. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a file. He tossed it onto the desk. It slid across the mahogany and stopped right in front of me. Open it, he said. I opened the file. It was a background check, a financial investigation report. I asked him what this was. I ran this on Brandon 6 months ago, Holloway said. When you told me he asked for that $50,000 for the real estate flip. I wanted to see if the deal was real. It wasn't. There was no real estate deal, Douglas. He used your $50,000 to pay off a gambling debt to a bookie in Las Vegas. I stared at the report. The numbers were there. The wire transfers. The dates. Holloway leaned forward, his voice hard and uncompromising. He didn't just disrespect you, Douglas. He has been stealing from you. He has been lying to you. And that text message, that wasn't an emotional outburst. That was a calculation. He thinks he has squeezed the lemon dry and now he is tossing the rind in the trash. He thinks you are weak. He thinks you are just a lonely old man who will take the abuse because you are desperate for connection. He pointed a finger at me. If you don't do this, you aren't saving him. You are enabling a monster. He is 32 years old. If he doesn't learn consequences now, he never will. And what about your grandson? What about Leo? Do you want Leo to be raised by a man who treats his own father like a disposable resource? The mention of Leo was the final straw. I thought about my grandson, watching his father, learning from him. I thought about the cycle of entitlement and selfishness continuing for another generation. I closed the file. The hesitation evaporated. The engineer was back. The structural failure had been confirmed. The demolition order had to be signed. I looked at Holloway. I told him to do it. Holloway nodded. He pressed a button on his intercom. Sarah, bring in the notary and the standard demand letter templates. And get the trust documents for the Reed estate. We are making some amendments. For the next hour, the only sound in the office was the scratching of my pen against paper. I signed the amendments to the trust, removing Brandon completely. I established a new, irrevocable trust for Leo, accessible only when he turned 25, with a clause that required him to be employed and drug-free. Then came the demand letter. Holloway handed it to me. It was brief. It was cold. It was terrifyingly formal. Outstanding debt obligations. Dear Mr. Reed, this firm represents your creditor, Mr. Douglas Reed. Pursuant to the terms of the attached promissory notes, we are hereby exercising the acceleration clause effective immediately. You are required to remit the total sum of $482,500.00 within 30 calendar days. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action. I held the pen over the signature line. My hand didn't shake, but my heart felt like a heavy stone in my chest. This was it, the point of no return. Once this letter went into the mail, there was no taking it back. I wasn't just asking for money. I was declaring war. I thought about the text message one last time. Don't expect us to take care of you. I signed my name. The ink was black and permanent. Holloway took the letter and placed it in a crisp white envelope. He stamped it with a red stamp that said, "Certified mail. Return receipt requested." "It goes out in the morning run," Holloway said. "He will get it by Monday." I stood up. I felt tired, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. The ambiguity was gone. The relationship was no longer based on guilt or obligation. It was now based on a contract. I asked Holloway one last question. I asked him if he thought Brandon would call me when he got the letter. Holloway stood up and shook my hand. His grip was firm. "He will call you, Douglas. He will scream. He will cry. He will threaten. But for the first time in his life, he will be calling you with respect. Because for the first time in his life, he will realize that you are not just his father. You are the man who holds the keys to his cage." I walked out of the office and back to the elevator. The doors closed, sealing me in. I watched the numbers count down on the display. 40, 30, 20. I was going back down to the street level, back to the rain, back to my empty house. But I wasn't going back as a victim. I was going back as the plaintiff. And God help the defendant when the court is in session. While I was sitting in a lawyer's office signing away their inheritance, my son and his wife were sitting at the most expensive brunch spot in downtown Seattle. The Emerald Lounge was the kind of place where a glass of orange juice cost $15 and the walls were lined with velvet. It was a place for people who wanted to be seen, and Brandon and Monica lived to be seen. They were seated at a prime window table bathed in the same gray light that felt so heavy to me, but to them it probably looked like silver. Brandon's phone buzzed on the white tablecloth. He glanced at it, and a slow, arrogant grin spread across his face. He didn't pick up the phone to call me. He didn't show a flicker of concern. He simply turned the screen toward Monica so she could read my text. He folded. Brandon said, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "I told you he would. The old man is predictable." Monica read the message where I had lied about selling the house and moving into a nursing home. She let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. She clapped her hands together, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. That ring was unpaid for, just like everything else in their lives, but in that moment, she looked like a queen who had just conquered a new territory. Finally, she said, taking a sip of her mimosa, "I thought he was going to drag this out for months. I was already looking up lawyers to declare him mentally incompetent, but this is so much easier." "Did he say when the sale goes through?" Brandon took a bite of his lobster, Benedict chewing slowly. "He says next week. A quick sale to an investment firm. That means cash, Monica. Liquid cash. Zillow estimates that house is worth $1.5 million. Even if he sells it for 1.2 for a quick close, that is a fortune." They didn't talk about my health. They didn't ask which nursing home I had chosen. They didn't wonder if I was scared or lonely. Instead, they immediately pulled out a napkin and a gold pen. Monica started writing. She wasn't writing a thank you note. She was doing math. "Okay," she said, her eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. "Let's be conservative. Let's say the net proceeds are $1 million after he pays off whatever small mortgage might be left. A nursing home costs about $6,000 a month for a decent one. But why should we pay for a decent one? He doesn't need luxury. He just needs a bed and a cafeteria." Brandon nodded, flagging down the waiter for another round of drinks. "Exactly. There is a state-subsidized facility in Tacoma. It's fine. It's clean. If we put him there, the cost is negligible. That leaves the bulk of the equity untouched." Monica drew a circle on the napkin. "We need to access that capital now, Brandon. We can't wait for him to actually die. That could take 20 years. You need to get power of attorney over his accounts the second that check clears. Tell him you need to manage his portfolio to protect him from scams. He trusts you. He's pathetic like that." I am watching this scene in my mind's eye, and it makes my blood run cold. But what happens next is even worse. They began to spend the money. They spent my life's work in between bites of toast. "First the debts," Brandon said, though he waved his hand dismissively. "I'll clear the credit cards. That's about 40 grand. No big deal. But then, babe, look at this." He pulled up a picture on his phone. It was a listing for a brand new Range Rover customized with matte black paint and red leather interior. "I can't show up to the firm in that 3-year-old BMW anymore," he said. "It's embarrassing. The partners are judging me. This car screams success. It's only $120,000. If I put 50 down from Dad's money, the monthly payments are nothing." Monica leaned in, scrolling through her own phone. "We are definitely upgrading the trip to the Maldives. No more economy class. We are flying first-class Emirates. And I want to stay in the water villa with the private slide. It's $10,000 a night, but we deserve it. We have been so stressed dealing with your dad's drama. We need to decompress." She looked at her husband, her face serious. "And Brandon the Birkin. You promised. If this deal went through, you promised me the Himalayan Birkin. The reseller has one for $30,000. It's an investment. It holds value better than gold." Brandon grabbed her hand and kissed it. "Consider it done. The moment the money hits his account, I'll transfer a management fee to myself, and we go shopping." They clinked their glasses together. "To family," they said. But they didn't mean me. They meant themselves. They meant the shiny, hollow image of a family they were trying to project to the world. Under the table, Brandon's leg was bouncing nervously. He checked his phone again, but this time he wasn't looking at my text. He was looking at a notification from his bank. Insufficient funds. His credit card had been declined for the parking meter earlier that morning. He swiped the notification away, his face tightening for a split second before he forced the smile back on. "Don't worry about the bill," he told Monica. "I'll put it on the emergency card. We are rich now. It's just a matter of logistics." They laughed loud and raucous, oblivious to the fact that the waiter was looking at this with disdain. They were celebrating a victory that hadn't happened. They were dividing the spoils of a war they didn't know they had already lost. Monica looked out the window at the rainy street. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "I almost feel bad for him. Leaving that big house must be hard. It's full of memories of your mom." Brandon shrugged. "He needs to move on. He's been holding on to the past for too long. We are doing him a favor, really. We are pushing him to let go. We are the good guys here." They truly believed it. That was the scariest part. They had twisted reality so completely that in their minds, stripping an old man of his home and dumping him in a state facility was an act of mercy. They finished their meal, leaving a messy table and a tip that was insultingly small. "Let's go to the dealership," Brandon said as they stood up. "I just want to test drive it, just to get a feel for it." Monica linked her arm through his. "And then let's go to the travel agent. I want to book those tickets today. I want to post the confirmation on Instagram tonight. Everyone needs to know we are going to the Maldives." They walked out of the restaurant, stepping over a puddle, heads held high. They looked like a power couple. They looked like winners. They had no idea that across town a courier was picking up a thick white envelope from the desk of Robert Holloway. They had no idea that the timer on their life had already started ticking down. They were planning a vacation, but they should have been planning a funeral for their lifestyle. The arrogance was blinding them, and I was counting on it. I needed them to be high on greed so the fall would break every bone in their financial bodies. 2 weeks had passed since I instructed Holloway to prepare the legal guillotine. 2 weeks of absolute radio silence from my end. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just sat in my house surrounded by the ghosts of 40 years of marriage and waited. I knew they would come. Greed has a very specific gravitational pull, and my house was the sun they were orbiting. They chose Thanksgiving for their invasion. It was poetic in a sick sort of way. A holiday dedicated to gratitude was about to be turned into an appraisal session. I saw the Porsche pull into the driveway at 10 in the morning. I had paid for that car, but as I watched Brandon slam the door, I realized I hadn't paid for the arrogance he stepped out with, that he had developed all on his own. Monica stepped out next, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast Seattle sky. She looked at the house not with the warmth of someone coming home, but with the critical squint of a developer looking at a teardown project. And then there was Leo. My grandson scrambled out of the back seat holding a plastic dinosaur, the only innocent thing in a 50-mile radius. I opened the door before they could knock. I wanted to control the threshold. Leo saw me and his face lit up. "Grandpa," he shouted, dropping the dinosaur and running toward me with his arms wide open. My heart, which I thought had turned to stone over the last fortnight, cracked a little. I bent down to catch him. But before Leo could reach me, Monica's hand shot out. She grabbed the collar of his jacket, jerking him back. "Leo, honey, no," she said, her voice sharp and performative. "Don't jump on Grandpa. Remember what we said, Grandpa is old and tired. You might hurt him or catch something." I stood up slowly, my joints clicking. I wasn't sick. I wasn't frail. I had run 3 miles on the treadmill that morning. But to them, I was already a corpse that hadn't gotten the memo. "Hello, Dad," Brandon said, stepping past me into the hallway without shaking my hand. He smelled of expensive cologne and anxiety. He scanned the living room, his eyes darting to the corners, checking for what dust deterioration. "We brought a turkey," Monica said, brushing past me as well. "It's pre-cooked from Whole Foods. We didn't want you stressing out over the oven. At your age, gas appliances can be dangerous." She didn't wait for a thank you. She walked straight into the dining room. I followed them, feeling less like the host and more like a ghost haunting my own hallway. I expected a family lunch. I expected awkward conversation about sports or the weather. I was naive. They hadn't come to eat. They had come to tag. Monica reached into her oversized designer bag and pulled out a stack of neon-on-yellow Post-it notes. She peeled one off. The sound was a sharp zip that cut through the quiet house. She walked over to the mahogany sideboard, a piece Catherine and I had bought in London 30 years ago. She slapped the yellow note onto the polished wood. On it, she had written one word in thick black marker. Keep. I stood by the kitchen island sipping black coffee, watching this violation unfold. I didn't say a word. I became the observer. I became the predator hiding in the tall grass, watching the prey graze, unaware that the wind had already shifted. "What are you doing, Monica?" I asked, my voice calm flat. She didn't even look at me. She moved to the china cabinet. Zip. Another note. Keep. "Oh, just organizing, Douglas," she said breezily. "Brandon told us you are selling the house next week. We are just helping you sort out what is valuable and what is trash. You can't take all this heavy furniture to a nursing home. The rooms there are tiny. You won't have space, so we are marking the things we are willing to take off your hands. Willing to take off my hands. As if they were doing me a favor by looting my life." Brandon walked in from the living room. He had a tape measure in his hand. He was measuring the floor-to-ceiling windows. "These drapes have to go," he muttered to himself, but loud enough for me to hear. "They are dated. If we want to flip this place or rent it out before selling, we need more light. Open concept. We should probably knock down the wall between the kitchen and the dining room." He turned to me, snapping the tape measure back into its casing. "Dad, did you keep the blueprints for the renovation you did in '95? I need to know which walls are load-bearing. Monica wants to create a flow for entertaining." I took another sip of coffee. The bitterness was grounding. "I thought you wanted me to sell the house to pay for my care," I said. "Why do you care about load-bearing walls?" Brandon laughed, a nervous, dismissive sound. "Well, yeah, eventually. But we need to maximize the value first. Or maybe we keep it as a rental property for a few years. Let the market appreciate." "You don't know about these things, Dad. You are old school. Let me handle the assets. You just focus on resting. Resting." That was their code word for dying. I watched Monica move to the fireplace. Above it hung the oil painting of the Seattle skyline, the one that hid my wall safe. She stared at it, tilting her head. "This is hideous," she declared. "Zip. A note. Sell." She slapped the note right onto the canvas. I felt a surge of rage, hot and electric, but I pushed it down. Not yet. The trap wasn't fully sprung yet. I needed them to commit fully. I needed to see exactly how far they would go. They moved through the house like a swarm of locusts. Zip. Keep on the leather armchair. Zip. Trash on my collection of engineering journals. Zip. Keep on the silver tea set Catherine loved. They didn't ask me a single question. They didn't ask. "Dad, does this chair mean anything to you?" They didn't ask. "Douglas, would you like to keep this photo album?" To them, I had already ceased to exist as a person with desires and memories. I was just an obstacle between them and the inventory. Leo was sitting on the floor playing with his dinosaur. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and confused. He saw the yellow notes sticking to everything like sores. "Grandpa," he whispered, "why is Mommy putting stickers on your stuff?" I walked over and sat down next to him on the floor. My knees protested, but I ignored them. I lowered my voice. "Because Leo," I said, stroking his hair, "your Mommy and Daddy are playing a game. They think they are shopping." "Can I play?" Leo asked. "No," I said softly. "This is a game for grown-ups who have forgotten how to be good. You stick with your dinosaur. Dinosaurs are honest. If they want to eat you, they roar. They don't smile and bring you a turkey." Monica walked back into the room. She had made her way to the master bedroom. My bedroom. The sanctuary I hadn't let anyone enter since Catherine passed. "Brandon, come here," she shouted. I stood up and followed them. Monica was standing in front of Catherine's vanity table. On it sat her jewelry box. It wasn't locked. I never locked it because I like to open it sometimes and smell her perfume. Monica had the box open. She was holding up Catherine's pearl necklace against her own throat, looking in the mirror. "This is vintage," she said, her voice trembling with greed. "Real saltwater pearls. This must be worth $5,000 alone." "Put it down," I said. The room went silent. It was the first time I had given a command. Monica turned, her face flushing with irritation. She didn't put it down. She clasped it around her neck. "Oh, relax, Douglas. It's just gathering dust here. Catherine would want someone to wear it. Someone young. Someone alive. It's a waste to leave it in a dark room. I'm doing you a favor by archiving it." Archiving it. Brandon stepped between us, sensing the tension. "Dad, she's right. Mom's stuff. It's just stuff. We are going to put it in a safe deposit box. For the family. For the family." I looked at my son. I looked at the woman he married. I looked at the yellow sticky notes that now polluted my home. I realized then that they weren't just greedy. They were hollow. They were empty vessels trying to fill themselves with things that didn't belong to them, hoping it would give them substance. I smiled. It was a cold, dry smile. "You know what I said? You are right. It is just stuff. Take it. Take whatever you want. Mark it all up." Monica's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," I said. "Because by Monday, none of this will matter." They took that as a surrender. They thought I was finally accepting my fate as the senile old man. They didn't understand that I was smiling because I knew something they didn't. I knew that the demand letter was currently sitting in the sorting facility of the downtown post office. I knew that in 48 hours the sheriff would be looking for assets to seize, and every single item they were marking with a yellow "keep" sticker was about to become evidence in a bankruptcy hearing. "Go ahead," I said, gesturing to the house. "Enjoy yourselves. Make yourselves at home." I turned and walked out of the bedroom, leaving them to their looting. I went back to the kitchen and poured another cup of coffee. I watched Leo playing on the floor. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the author of the final chapter, and I was just letting the villains write their own tragic ending before I closed the book. The house was quiet again, save for the zip, zip, zip of the yellow notes. It sounded like the ticking of a bomb, and I was the only one who knew when it was set to explode. We sat down at the dining room table, a slab of mahogany that had hosted 30 years of laughter, arguments, and toasts. Today, it hosted a crime scene. The pre-cooked turkey from the grocery store sat in the middle of the table, looking pale and dry. Monica hadn't bothered to put it on a platter. She just peeled back the aluminum foil and set the plastic container on the heat-resistant pad. It was a perfect metaphor for their relationship with me. Convenient, devoid of warmth, and strictly transactional. Leo was the only one eating with any enthusiasm. He was mashing potatoes with his fork, humming a little tune. I watched him, wishing I could shrink the world down to just this chair and that boy and let the rest of the room dissolve into the ether. But I couldn't. I had to play the scene out. Brandon cleared his throat. It was the sound of a salesman revving his engine. He poured wine into his glass, filling it almost to the brim, but he didn't offer to pour any for me. So Dad, he started leaning back in his chair with a feigned casualness that made my skin crawl. "We need to talk logistics. If you are serious about moving to a facility, time is money. The market is shifting. Interest rates are ticking up. You don't want to leave this house sitting on the market for months." I cut a piece of the dry turkey. It tasted like sawdust. I chewed slowly, forcing him to wait. "I'm listening," I said. Brandon exchanged a quick look with Monica. It was the look of two conspirators who had rehearsed their lines in the car. "I took the liberty of running the comps in the neighborhood," Brandon said. "The Miller house down the street sold for $1.3 million, but that had a renovated kitchen. Your kitchen is, well, it's 90s chic, but the lot size is good. I think if we list it aggressively at 1.2, we can get a bidding war going. I repeated softly. Brandon smiled, a slick, practiced expression he probably used on first-time homebuyers who didn't know better. Well, yes. I'm a licensed broker, Dad. It makes sense for me to handle the listing. Why give 3% commission to a stranger when you can keep it in the family? I'll cut my fee to 2%. That saves you $12,000 right there. Plus, I can manage the contractors for the staging. Monica has a great eye for that. Monica chimed in, pointing her fork at the window. We need to declutter immediately. That's why we were tagging things. Most of this heavy furniture makes the rooms feel small. We need to rent a storage unit, move everything out, paint the walls a neutral white, and bring in modern staging furniture. It will make the place look bigger, younger. I looked at the yellow sticky note on the sideboard. Keep. I looked at the note on the china cabinet. Keep. So I asked, let me get this straight. You want me to move out, pay you to sell my house, and pay for a storage unit for furniture that you have already marked for yourself? Brandon frowned, putting down his wine glass. You are twisting my words. We are trying to maximize your equity. This is your nest egg, Dad. We want to make sure you get the most out of it. And what happens to the money after the sale, I asked. Brandon shrugged. It goes into a managed account. I can help you with that too. We'll set up a conservative portfolio. Bonds, index funds, something safe. We'll draw a monthly allowance for your nursing home fees and the rest will grow. Grow for who, I asked. For you, Brandon said, his voice rising slightly. For your future, I put my fork down. The metal clinked against the china, a sharp punctuation mark in the conversation. I wiped my mouth with the napkin. I looked at my son, really looked at him. I saw the desperation behind his eyes. I saw the debts he wasn't telling me about. I saw the house of cards he had built, and how he was viewing my home as the glue to hold it all together. You can stop the sales pitch, Brandon, I said calmly. You don't need to list the house. Brandon blinked. What do you mean? You can't sell it for sale by owner. You'll get fleeced. You don't know the paperwork. I didn't say I was selling it myself, I replied. I said you don't need to list it, because it is already sold. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and thick like the air before a thunderstorm. Monica froze with her glass halfway to her mouth. Brandon's jaw actually dropped. What Brandon whispered. I took a sip of water. I signed the papers yesterday morning, I lied. A private investment firm. They buy properties for cash as is. No inspections, no staging, no painting the walls white. They offered me a flat price and I took it. We close on Monday. Brandon's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. It wasn't embarrassment. It was fury. You sold the house without consulting me for how much market value, I said vaguely. Enough to cover my needs. Monica slammed her glass down. Wine sloshed onto the tablecloth. Who is the buyer, she demanded. What is the name of the firm? We need to see the contract. You probably got ripped off. You are an old man, Douglas. People prey on seniors. You could have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm not senile, Monica, I said, my voice hardening. I was negotiating multi-million-dollar infrastructure contracts while you were still learning to color inside the lines. The deal is done. The money is wired. It's over. Brandon stood up. His chair scraped violently against the floor. You can't do that, he shouted. This is a family asset. This is my inheritance. You can't just liquidate it without talking to me. I am your son, I looked up at him unmoved. I thought you had your own life, Brandon. I thought you had your own family. Isn't that what you texted me? You told me to sell the house. You told me not to be a burden. I am doing exactly what you asked. I am liquidating my assets to pay for my own care so I never have to ask you for a dime. Why are you upset? You should be celebrating. You are off the hook. But the money, Brandon sputtered. Where is the money going? I leaned forward. That is none of your business. Just like my care is none of your business. Monica stood up now, her face twisted and ugly. She pointed a manicured finger at me. You did this on purpose, she hissed. You knew we needed that commission. You knew we were counting on the equity management. You selfish old bastard. You sold it behind our backs to spite us. I looked at Leo. He had stopped eating. He was shrinking into his chair, looking from his father to his mother, terrified. Stop yelling, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You are scaring the boy. I don't care, Monica screamed. What about the furniture? What about the pearls? What about the things we marked? The contract is for the house right. The contents are still ours. I stood up slowly. I picked up the yellow sticky note from the sideboard. I crumpled it in my hand. Actually, I said part of the deal was a vacancy clause. The house needs to be empty by Monday. I hired a junk removal service. They are coming tomorrow. Junk removal. Brandon looked like he was going to have a stroke. That is a $5,000 dining table, I know, I said. I bought it. And since I can't take it with me to the nursing home, and since you have your own life and your own furniture, I donated it. All of it. The furniture, the silver, the books. It's all going to Goodwill. They are picking it up at 8 a.m. The tax write-off will be substantial. Monica let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. The pearls, what about the pearls? I donated those to a battered women's shelter auction, I said. I thought it was fitting. Catherine would have wanted them to help women who are trying to escape bad situations. You gave away Mom's pearls, Brandon whispered, looking at me with pure hatred. You are sick. You are a sick, bitter old man. I didn't flinch. I walked around the table and stood at the head, gripping the back of my chair. Get out, I said. Brandon looked at me, stunned. What? Get out of my house, I repeated. Take your cold turkey, take your yellow sticky notes, and get out. You came here to appraise me like a used car. You came here to strip the copper out of the walls before the body was even cold. Well, the sale is closed. The shop is shut. Get out. Brandon puffed out his chest, trying to intimidate me. I was 65, but I had spent my life on construction sites. I had stared down union bosses and corrupt inspectors. A soft-handed real estate broker in a leased suit didn't scare me. This isn't over, Dad, he spat. I will contest this. I will get a lawyer. I will prove you are mentally incompetent, and I will reverse this sale. You won't see a dime of that money. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time. Go ahead, Brandon. Get a lawyer. In fact, I highly recommend you get a very good one. You are going to need him on Monday. He didn't know what I meant. He thought I was bluffing about the sale. He had no idea that the real lawyer he needed wasn't for contesting a house sale, but for defending against a foreclosure. Monica grabbed her bag. Come on, Brandon. Let's go. He's insane. We'll call Dr. Evans. We'll have him committed. We are taking the pearls, by the way. She reached for her neck, but I slammed my hand down on the table. The silverware jumped. You walk out that door with those pearls, Monica and I will call the police and report a theft, and I will press charges. Do you want a criminal record on top of everything else? She froze. She looked at my eyes and saw that I wasn't bluffing. With a tremble of pure rage, she unclasped the necklace and threw it onto the table. It landed with a soft clatter next to the dry turkey. I hope you rot in that nursing home, she spat. I hope you die alone. I picked up the pearls and put them in my pocket. I already am alone, Monica. I've been alone since the day Catherine died. Having you two vultures circling me didn't make me less lonely. It just made me tired. Brandon grabbed Leo's arm, pulling him roughly off the chair. We are leaving, Leo. Don't say goodbye to Grandpa. He doesn't love us. Leo looked back at me, tears streaming down his face. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to tell him that I loved him more than life itself, and that everything I was doing was to ensure he didn't turn into the man dragging him out the door. But I stayed still. I had to remain the villain in their story, so I could be the hero in his future. I watched them storm out. The front door slammed so hard the windows rattled. I heard the Porsche engine roar to life, an angry mechanical scream. And then silence returned. I looked at the dining room. The yellow notes were still stuck to everything, bright flags of greed. I walked over to the sideboard and peeled off the note that said keep. I crumpled it up and tossed it onto the half-eaten turkey. I wasn't going to a nursing home. I wasn't selling the house. And I definitely wasn't insane. I was just a father who had finally decided to stop being a doormat. I sat back down at the head of the table. I poured myself a glass of the wine Brandon had opened. It was a cheap blend, acidic and harsh. I drank it anyway. Monday, I whispered to the empty room. Monday is coming. I checked my watch. The courier would be delivering the demand letter to Brandon's office at 9 a.m. sharp on Monday morning. They thought they had lost an inheritance today. They had no idea they were about to lose their freedom. The slap of the sold house was just the warm-up. The punch was yet to land. And I, Douglas Reed, was keeping my fist clenched tight. Monday morning arrived with the aggressive brightness of a day that didn't care about your weekend hangover. In the glass-walled offices of Sterling and Finch Real Estate, the air conditioner hummed a low, expensive note. Brandon Reed sat in his ergonomic chair, the one that cost more than my first car, and surveyed his domain. He was wearing a new suit, a navy blue Italian cut, that he had charged to a credit card that was already $3,000 over the limit. But it didn't matter. In his mind, the wire transfer from the sale of my house was imminent. He was just borrowing against a future that he believed was guaranteed. He took a sip of his double-shot espresso and looked at his calendar. He had a lunch meeting with the developer at noon. He planned to order the most expensive scotch on the menu and hint that he was coming into significant family capital. It was all part of the game. Fake it until you make it, and then keep faking it so nobody realizes you are hollow inside. At 9:15, the receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who Brandon had been trying to impress for months, knocked on his glass door. She looked nervous. "Mr. Reed," she said, "there is a courier here for you. He says it is urgent legal correspondence. He needs a signature." Brandon smiled. He actually smiled. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. He thought it was the contract for the house sale. He thought I had capitulated completely and was sending him the paperwork to manage the funds. "Send him in, Sarah," he said, his voice deep and authoritative. The courier was a short man in a gray uniform, holding a thick, white envelope with a red stripe. He didn't look impressed by Brandon's suit or the view of the city. He just held out a digital pad. "Sign here," the man said. Brandon scrawled his signature, that arrogant loop he had practiced since high school. He took the envelope. It felt heavy. It felt important. "Thank you, my good man," Brandon said, tossing the envelope onto his desk as the courier left. He waited until the door clicked shut. Then, like a child on Christmas morning, he grabbed his letter opener, a silver blade shaped like a dagger. He slit the top of the envelope. He pulled out the stack of papers. The first thing he saw was the letterhead. Holloway and Associates. He smirked. He knew Holloway. That was my friend, the old lawyer who used to come to our backyard barbecues. Brandon probably thought Holloway was just facilitating the transfer of assets. He unfolded the cover letter. He began to read, and as he read, the air in the room seemed to vanish. The hum of the air conditioner stopped. The noise of the city outside the window fell silent. The only sound in the universe was the blood rushing to his ears, a roaring torrent of panic. Redemand for immediate payment of outstanding promissory notes. Brandon blinked. He shook his head, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him. He read the next line. "Dear Mr. Reed, this firm represents your creditor, Mr. Douglas Reed. We are writing to formally notify you that Mr. Reed is exercising his right under Clause 4, Section B of the attached promissory notes to accelerate the debt and demand full repayment. Brandon's hands started to shake. The paper rattled a dry, crinkling sound that seemed incredibly loud in the quiet office. He dropped into his chair, his legs suddenly unable to hold his weight. He flipped the page. There was a table, a spreadsheet. Date October 12th, 2014. Item Porsche Cayenne purchase. Amount $80,000. Status unpaid. Date June 5th, 2016. Item Wedding expenses. Amount $150,000. Status unpaid. Date January 10th, 2023. Item Personal loan. Amount $50,000. Status unpaid. His eyes dragged down the column past dates he had forgotten, past amounts he had treated as gifts, past the memories of me handing him checks, while he smiled and promised to pay me back someday. He reached the bottom line. The total. $482,500. Brandon stared at the number. It sat there on the white paper like a coiled snake ready to strike. 482,000. It wasn't just a number. It was a death sentence. He couldn't breathe. He loosened his tie, his fingers fumbling with the silk knot. His chest felt tight, constricted by the sudden crushing weight of reality. He didn't have $400,000. He didn't have $40,000. He had $12 in his checking account and a wallet full of maxed-out plastic. He read the next paragraph. You have 30 calendar days from the receipt of this letter to remit the total amount in certified funds. Failure to comply will result in the immediate filing of a lawsuit, a motion for summary judgment, and the subsequent seizure of assets, including, but not limited to, real estate vehicles and garnishment of wages. Seizure of assets. Garnishment of wages. Brandon looked around his office. He looked at the lease on the BMW he drove. He looked at the penthouse he rented. He looked at his career, which was built entirely on the image of success. If his wages were garnished, if his car was repossessed in the company parking lot, if he was sued by his own father, it was over. The partners would fire him. The developer he was meeting for lunch would laugh in his face. Monica would leave him. Monica. Oh God, Monica. He grabbed his phone. His fingers were slippery with sweat. He unlocked the screen and dialed my number. He didn't think about what time it was. He didn't think about the last time we spoke when he told me to get out of my own house. He just reacted like a drowning man reaching for a piece of driftwood. The phone rang. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3 rings. Pick up, pick up, pick up, you old bastard, Brandon hissed through his teeth, rocking back and forth in his expensive chair. On the 4th ring, the line clicked open. There was no greeting, no hello, just silence. Dad Brandon's voice cracked. It was high and thin, the voice of a scared little boy. Dad, I just got this letter. What the hell is this? I waited a beat before answering. I was sitting on my porch, watching the rain, drinking a cup of tea. Hello, Brandon, I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice I used when I was inspecting a crack in a foundation. Is this a joke? Brandon shouted, finding a shred of his anger again. Is this some kind of sick joke? $400,000? Are you insane? You gave me that money, I loaned you that money. I corrected him gently. And you signed for it. Did you read the attachments, Brandon? The ones with your signature? I didn't think you were serious, Brandon screamed. Nobody does that to their kid. You can't just call in 10 years of loans in one day. I don't have that kind of money. I know you don't, I said. That is why I gave you 30 days. You are a resourceful young man. You have your own life. You have your own family. I am sure you can figure it out. Dad, please, Brandon begged, his voice breaking again. You have to stop this. Holloway is crazy. This will ruin me. If this goes to court, I lose my license. I lose everything. You should have thought about that when you told me to sell my house and move into a state facility, I said. You wanted a transaction, Brandon. You wanted to treat our relationship like a business deal. Well, this is business, and the audit is overdue. Dad. I'm sorry, okay. I'm sorry about Thanksgiving. I'm sorry about the text. Just tell Holloway to withdraw the letter. I took a sip of my tea. The rain was beautiful today. I can't do that, son, I said. The letter is already in the system. The clock is already ticking. You have 29 days and 23 hours left. I suggest you stop screaming at me and start looking for a second job. But Dad... Goodbye, Brandon. I hung up the phone. I didn't slam it down. I just pressed the red button. I imagined him sitting in his glass office holding the dead phone surrounded by the wreckage of his own arrogance. I imagined the panic clawing at his throat. For the first time in his life, my son was facing a problem that my checkbook wasn't going to fix. In fact, my checkbook was the one holding the gun. I felt a twinge of sadness deep in my gut, but I let it pass. A surgeon cannot cry while he is cutting out a tumor. He has to be steady. He has to be precise. And I had a lot more cutting to do. Gravity is a funny thing. You usually don't notice it until the ground disappears beneath your feet. For my son Brandon, the ground didn't just disappear. It was pulled out from under him by a court order stamped by a judge who had no patience for unpaid debts. I wasn't there to see it happen, but I didn't need to be. I knew the schedule. I knew that at 9 a.m. Holloway had filed the ex parte writ of attachment. I knew that by noon, the electronic tentacles of the legal system would have reached every financial institution in the state. And I knew that by 1 o'clock, Brandon would be sitting down for lunch with a client he couldn't afford to lose, trying to pay with money he no longer had. The restaurant was Le Cavalier. It was the kind of place where the napkins were made of linen thick enough to be bedsheets, and the waiters spoke in hushed tones that made you feel like you were in a library. Brandon was dining with Mr. Sterling, a developer who was looking for a broker to move 20 luxury condos. This was the deal that was supposed to save Brandon's year. This was the commission that was supposed to cover the gambling debts he thought I didn't know about. I can imagine the scene perfectly. Brandon was likely leaning back in his chair, swirling a glass of Pinot Noir, laughing too loudly at Mr. Sterling's jokes. He was projecting confidence. He was the successful heir to the Reed fortune. He probably ordered the Wagyu beef. He probably insisted on paying the bill. And then the check came. Brandon would have reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out his sleek black card holder. He would have selected his platinum credit card, the one with the high limit, and placed it on the silver tray with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "It's on me," he would have said. A small gesture of appreciation for our future partnership. The waiter would have taken the tray and walked away. Brandon would have continued talking, maybe checking his watch, maybe thinking about the test drive he had scheduled later for the Range Rover. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. He didn't have the receipt. He was holding the card between his thumb and forefinger, treating it like a dead insect. "I am sorry, sir," the waiter would have said, his voice dropping to that polite, devastating whisper. The card was declined. Brandon laughed. It was a nervous, incredulous laugh. "That's impossible," he said. "Run it again. It's probably the chip. It's been acting up." "I ran it 3 times, sir," the waiter replied, his face a mask of professional pity. "The system says, do not honor. Do not honor." 3 simple words that strip a man of his dignity faster than a slap in the face. Brandon's smile faltered. He could feel Mr. Sterling watching him. The developer wasn't saying anything, but his eyes were narrowing. In the world of high-stakes real estate, if a broker can't buy lunch, he certainly can't move $20 million in inventory. "Here, try this one." Brandon said, his hands starting to sweat as he pulled out his backup card, the gold card. The waiter took it. He walked away. He came back 2 minutes later. "I am afraid this one is declined as well, sir." Brandon felt the room spin. The air conditioner seemed to stop working. Sweat pricked at his hairline. This wasn't a glitch. This was a blockade. I don't understand," Brandon stammered. "I just used it this morning." He looked at Mr. Sterling. The older man was already reaching for his own wallet. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked annoyed. He looked like a man who realized he had wasted 2 hours on a fraud. "Put it away, Brandon," Mr. Sterling said coldly, throwing his corporate card onto the table. "I'll get it. But I think we are done here. My partners and I need someone with stability. Wait. Let me call my bank." Brandon pleaded, standing up. "Don't bother," Sterling said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He didn't offer a handshake. He just walked out, leaving Brandon standing alone at the table with 2 declined credit cards and a half-eaten steak that was suddenly very hard to swallow. Brandon scrambled out of the restaurant, ignoring the stares of the other patrons. He pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. He tried to log in. "Access denied. Please contact your branch." He tapped the screen furiously. He tried his savings account. Access denied. He tried the joint account he shared with Monica. Access denied. He stood on the sidewalk surrounded by the busy lunch crowd of downtown Seattle and felt a cold wind blow through his expensive suit. He wasn't just broke. He was frozen. He had been digitally erased from the economy. He called the bank. He screamed at the automated system until he got a human being. "Sir," the representative said calmly, "I see a garnish order and a total asset freeze placed by the Sheriff's Department based on a filing from, let me see, Holloway and Associates. We are legally required to lock all accounts associated with your Social Security number." "My dad," Brandon whispered. He actually did it. He hung up. He needed to get home. He needed to find Monica. He needed to figure out a plan. He ran to the parking garage where he kept his leased BMW. But the nightmare was just shifting gears. When he arrived at his luxury apartment complex, he didn't see his valet. He saw a flatbed tow truck blocking the entrance. It was a massive, ugly machine, idling loudly, belching diesel fumes into the air. And on the back of the truck, hooked up by its rear bumper, was his BMW. "Wait!" Brandon screamed, running toward the truck. "Stop! That's my car!" He reached the driver's side door just as the truck began to move. He pounded on the glass. The driver, a large man with a thick beard and eyes that had seen 1,000 desperate people, rolled down the window an inch. "Get off the truck, pal," the driver said. "You can't take this," Brandon yelled. "I leased this. It's not even mine." "Yeah, and the leasing company got a notice of default and a repo order about an hour ago," the driver said, bored. "Something about a lien holder exercising rights. You want to argue? Call the bank. Now step back before I run over your foot." Brandon watched helplessly as the truck pulled away, dragging his status symbol into the traffic. The alarm on the BMW was chirping sadly, a digital cry for help that no one answered. And then he heard the screaming. It wasn't the car alarm. It was Monica. She was standing in the lobby of the building, surrounded by 3 of their neighbors. She was wearing her yoga clothes, holding a yoga mat, and she looked like she was about to explode. "Brandon," she shrieked when she saw him. She ran out the automatic doors, not caring that she was making a scene. "What is happening?" she screamed, shoving her phone in his face. "I tried to pay for my Pilates class and they cut up my card. I tried to buy a smoothie and it was declined. And now the concierge tells me that our key fobs for the elevator have been deactivated because the rent check bounced." Brandon looked at his wife. He didn't see a partner. He saw a mirror of his own panic reflecting back at him with twice the intensity and none of the sympathy. "It's my dad," Brandon whispered. He froze everything. Monica stared at him. Her eyes went wide, and then they narrowed into slits of pure venom. "You told me he was bluffing," she yelled, hitting him on the chest with her yoga mat. "You told me he was a weak old man. You said we had 30 days. "He accelerated the debt," Brandon said, his voice trembling. "It's a legal thing." He didn't wait. "Well, fix it," Monica screamed. "Fix it now. I have a hair appointment at 3. I have friends coming over tonight. I can't get into my own apartment. People were stopping to watch." The doorman was looking away, embarrassed. The neighbors were whispering. This was the couple that walked around like they owned the building, the couple that complained if the lobby flowers weren't fresh enough. Now they were standing on the sidewalk, locked out, broke, and screaming at each other. "I can't fix it," Brandon said, tears starting to well up in his eyes. "He took everything. The accounts are locked. The car is gone." Monica took a step back. She looked at him with a mixture of disgust and horror. "So we have nothing?" she asked. "We have nothing," Brandon admitted. She didn't hug him. She didn't say, "We will get through this." She looked at his empty hands, his panicked face, and she made a calculation. "I am going to my mother's," she said, cold. "Monica, wait," Brandon pleaded, reaching for her. "Don't touch me," she snapped. "You are a loser, Brandon. You promised me a lifestyle. You promised me the Maldives. And now you can't even buy me a smoothie. Do not call me until you get your money back." She turned on her heel and walked away, hailing a taxi. She got in and Brandon watched her drive off. He realized then that she didn't even have money to pay for the cab. She would probably have her mother meet her at the curb with cash. She would be fine. She always found a way to be fine. Brandon stood alone in front of the building he could no longer enter. It started to rain again. He reached into his pocket to call an Uber, but then he remembered. His app was linked to his card. His card was dead. He had no car, no cash, no credit, no wife, no home access. He sat down on the curb, oblivious to the damp concrete soaking through his Italian suit pants. He put his head in his hands. Across the city in my dry, warm study, I poured myself another cup of tea. I didn't need to see him sitting there to know that the lesson had begun. I had stripped away the insulation. I had taken away the buffer that money provides against the harshness of the world. For the first time in 32 years, Brandon was feeling the cold. I looked at the phone, waiting. I knew he wouldn't call yet. He was still in shock. He was still in the denial phase of grief. But soon the hunger would set in. Soon the reality of sleeping on a park bench or begging a friend for a couch would become real. I took a sip of tea. It was Earl Grey, my favorite. The breakdown was complete. Now we had to wait and see if there was anything beneath the rubble worth saving, or if my son was just a facade all the way down. The hallway of the luxury apartment complex was silent, lined with plush carpet that smelled of lavender and money. It was the kind of silence that usually signaled comfort, but for my son Brandon and his wife Monica, standing outside door 402, it was the silence of a tomb. They had managed to slip into the building behind a delivery driver, a small victory that felt pathetic the moment they reached their own front door. The electronic lock on the door blinked red. It was a small, unblinking eye of judgment. Brandon pressed his key fob against the sensor again. Nothing. No beep. No mechanical click of the deadbolt sliding back. Just that cold, accusatory red light. Brandon leaned his forehead against the doorwood. He looked exhausted. The adrenaline of the restaurant and the tow truck had faded, leaving behind a hollow, shaking fear. Beside him, Monica wasn't shaking. She was vibrating with a frequency that could shatter glass. She stood with her arms crossed, her expensive yoga mat tucked under one arm like a weapon, staring at the back of her husband's head as if deciding where to insert the knife. "Open the door, Brandon," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It was a hiss. "I can't," Brandon whispered into the wood. "The management company must have remotely disabled the access." The rent check bounced, Monica. "The lease is in default." So kick it down, she said. Brandon turned around slowly. He looked at her as if she were speaking a foreign language. Kick it down. Monica, this is a solid oak door with a steel core. And there are cameras everywhere. Do you want me to add breaking and entering to the list of lawsuits my father is filing against me? Monica dropped her yoga mat. It hit the floor with a soft thud. She stepped closer to him, invading his personal space, her eyes wild. I don't care about lawsuits, Brandon. I care about my things. My jewelry is in there. My clothes are in there. My life is in that apartment. You need to get me inside. I can't! Brandon yelled, his voice cracking. The echo of his shout bounced down the long hallway. A door opened down the hall. Mrs. Gable, the elderly widow in 405, poked her head out. She looked at Brandon, then at Monica, and then quietly closed her door. The lock clicked. It was a sound of exclusion. See what you did, Monica sneered. You are humiliating us. Again. Brandon slid down the door until he was sitting on the floor. He pulled his knees to his chest, ruining the crease in his Italian trousers. He looked small. He looked like the little boy who used to hide under the dining room table when thunder shook the house. But there was no table to hide under now, and the storm was entirely of his own making. Monica, please, he said, looking up at her. I need you to be on my team right now. We need to figure this out. We can go to your mom's house. We can regroup. I'll fix this. I'll talk to Dad again. I'll beg him if I have to. Monica laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. My team, she asked. You want me to be on your team? Brandon, look at you. You are sitting on the floor of a hallway. You have no car. You have no money. You have no credit. You don't have a team. You are a liability. That's not fair, Brandon said. I gave you everything you wanted. The trip to Paris, the car, the ring. You gave me those things with your father's money, Monica screamed, finally losing her composure. She paced back and forth in the narrow hallway, her hands gesturing wildly. I didn't marry a man, Brandon. I married a potential. I married the heir to the Reed estate. You told me your father was loaded. You told me he was old and checked out. You told me that managing his assets was just a formality. I thought it was... Brandon protested. You thought Monica mocked him. You are 32 years old, Brandon. You shouldn't be thinking. You should be knowing. You should have secured the power of attorney years ago. But you were too lazy. You were too busy playing big shot with your friends to actually do the work of securing the bag. Securing the bag. That was how she saw my life's work. A bag to be secured. I loved you, Brandon said quietly. I thought you loved me. Monica stopped pacing. She looked down at him. Her face softened, but not with kindness. It softened with pity. The kind of pity you feel for a dog that has been hit by a car, sad, but you don't want to get blood on your upholstery. Oh, Brandon, she sighed. I loved the life we had. I loved the potential of what we could be. But love requires stability. Love requires a foundation. I can't love a man who can't even open his own front door. She reached into her purse. For a second, Brandon thought she was going to pull out a tissue to wipe his tears. Instead, she pulled out her phone. I'm calling an Uber, she said. My mother will pay for it when I get there. You are leaving me here, Brandon asked, panic rising in his voice again. Where am I supposed to go? I don't know, Monica said, tapping on her screen. Maybe you should go ask your dad for a room. Oh, wait. You burned that bridge too, didn't you? She looked at the screen, frowning. 7 minutes away, she muttered. She leaned against the wall as far away from Brandon as she could get without leaving the hallway. They stood there in silence for a long minute. The red light on the door blinked. Blink. Blink, blink. You know, Brandon said, his voice hardening slightly. You are just as much to blame for this as I am. You were the one who pushed for the penthouse. You were the one who wanted the Maldives. You spent the money just as fast as I borrowed it." Monica looked up from her phone. Her eyes were cold, dead sharks. "But my name isn't on the notes, is it?" she asked softly. Brandon froze. "I never signed the promissory notes, Brandon." She continued, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Your dad was smart, I'll give him that. But you were stupid. You signed everything. The car, the wedding loan, the business loan, it's all on you. I am just the spouse. And if I file for divorce before the bankruptcy hits, I can argue that I was unaware of the financial misconduct. I can walk away clean." Brandon stared at her. The breath left his lungs. He realized then that she had been planning an exit strategy from the very beginning. She hadn't just been spending money. She had been insulating herself. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "Watch me," she said. Her phone pinged. "Your driver is arriving." She pushed off the wall. She didn't look back at the apartment door. She didn't look at the life she was leaving behind, locked inside. She just adjusted her coat and started walking toward the elevator. "Monica," Brandon yelled. "Monica, come back! You can't leave me like this!" She didn't stop. She pressed the elevator button. The doors opened immediately, as if the building itself couldn't wait to get rid of her. She stepped in and turned around. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Brandon sitting on the floor in a ruined suit. Monica standing tall in the elevator, ready to find her next host. "Good luck, Brandon," she said. "I hope you find a comfortable park bench." The doors slid shut. Brandon was alone. He sat there for a long time. The silence of the hallway returned, but now it felt heavier. It felt like the weight of the entire world pressing down on his shoulders. He looked at the red light on the lock. It was still blinking. It was keeping him out, but in a way it was also keeping the truth in. He had lost his house. He had lost his car. He had lost his wife. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He had 12% battery left. He opened his contacts. He scrolled past his drinking buddies. He scrolled past his business partners. He scrolled past Monica. His thumb hovered over my name. Dad. He pressed it. The phone rang. Once, twice. I was sitting in my study watching the rain. I saw his name on the caller ID. I knew exactly where he was. I knew exactly who had just left him. I let it ring. "Not yet, son," I whispered to the empty room. "You aren't ready yet. You are still looking for a rescue. You need to hit the bottom. You need to feel the concrete." I declined the call. In the hallway of the luxury apartment, Brandon listened to the call go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He just let the phone drop from his hand onto the plush carpet. He pulled his knees tighter to his chest and buried his face in his arms. And for the first time since he was a child, my son began to cry. Not the angry tears of entitlement, but the broken, heaving sobs of a man who realizes he is completely, utterly alone. Desperation has a smell. It smells like stale coffee, cheap cologne, and nervous sweat. That was the aroma that greeted me when I walked into the settlement conference room at the county courthouse 3 days later. I wasn't required to be there. Holloway told me I could stay home and let him handle the sharks. But I wanted to be there. I needed to see if my son had learned humility yet, or if he was still trying to bluff his way through a losing hand. He was still bluffing. Brandon sat on one side of the scarred wooden table. He looked terrible. His hair was unwashed, his eyes were red-rimmed, and he was wearing a suit that looked like he had slept in it. Next to him sat his legal counsel. He wasn't a partner from a downtown firm. He was a man named Mr. Salinger, whose business card probably advertised services for DUI defense and slip-and-fall accidents on the back of a bus bench. Salinger wore a suit that was a size too big and kept tapping his pen against a yellow legal pad that was almost entirely blank. Holloway and I sat down opposite them. Holloway placed a single thick file folder on the table. The sound of it hitting the wood was heavy like a judge's gavel. Mr. Salinger cleared his throat. He tried to project confidence, but his eyes kept darting toward Holloway's expensive briefcase. "Gentleman," Salinger began, his voice thin. "We are here to file a countersuit against Mr. Douglas Reed for fraud, undue influence, and predatory lending practices against a family member. My client asserts that the monies transferred to him over the last 10 years were gifts widely understood, within the context of a father-son relationship, to be non-repayable. The so-called promissory notes were signed under duress and without proper legal counsel. Therefore, we are moving to have the debt declared invalid." Brandon nodded aggressively. "That's right. You tricked me into signing those papers, Dad. You told me it was just for your records. You never intended to collect. That makes it fraud." I looked at my son. He was grasping at straws, trying to rewrite history to fit his victim narrative. He truly believed that if he lied loud enough, the truth would change shape. Holloway didn't speak. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply opened the file folder. He slid a piece of paper across the table to Mr. Salinger. "Exhibit A," Holloway said calmly. "An email dated June 12, 2016, sent from Brandon Reed to Douglas Reed. Subject line: The wedding." Salinger picked up the paper. He adjusted his glasses. "Read the highlighted paragraph, please," Holloway instructed. Salinger read it out loud, his voice faltering slightly. "Dad, I know asking for 150 grand is a lot, but Monica really wants this vineyard venue. I swear to you this is a loan. I will pay you back every cent once I get my commission from the Towers project. I am a man of my word. Please let me sign whatever you need me to sign to make this official." Holloway slid another paper across. "Exhibit B." Holloway continued. A text message thread from October 2014. "Regarding the Porsche," Brandon writes, "I don't want a handout, Dad. I want to stand on my own 2 feet. Treat this car as an investment in my image. I will repay the principal plus interest. I want to do this the right way." Holloway leaned forward, clasping his hands. "We have 47 pages of digital correspondence, Mr. Salinger. In every single instance where money changed hands, your client explicitly stated in writing that he intended to repay the debt. He used words like loan, investment, and debt. He never once used the word gift. Not once." Brandon's face went pale. He sank lower in his chair. He had forgotten. He had forgotten the promises he made when he was desperate for cash. He had forgotten that the internet is written in ink, not pencil. Salinger looked at the papers, then he looked at Brandon. The look wasn't friendly. It was the look of a lawyer who realizes his client has lied to him and led him into a massacre. "You told me there was no paper trail," Brandon Salinger whispered harshly. "You told me it was all verbal." I forgot about the emails," Brandon stammered. "But it doesn't matter. He's my father. He trapped me." Holloway pulled out one final document. It was a screenshot of a text message, the one Brandon had sent me on my birthday. And finally, Holloway said, his voice dropping to a deadly chill. "Exhibit C." The text message that triggered the acceleration clause. "Don't expect us to take care of you. I have my own life." Holloway looked at Salinger. "Your client claims undue influence and a loving family relationship as the basis for these being gifts. Yet here he is stating clearly that he wishes to sever financial and emotional ties with his father. You can't have it both ways, counsel. You can't claim the benefits of a family relationship while simultaneously renouncing the responsibilities of one." Salinger closed his legal pad. He put his pen in his pocket. He knew it was over. He knew that if this went to a judge, he wouldn't just lose. He would be laughed out of the courtroom. I think we are done here, Salinger said, standing up. He began to pack his briefcase. Brandon grabbed his arm. What? Where are you going? You have to fight them, Mr. Reed, Salinger said, shaking him off. You have no case. You acknowledged the debt repeatedly. You signed the notes. And you alienated the lender in writing. My advice, settle. Beg for mercy. Because legally, they have you nailed to the wall. Salinger walked out of the room without looking back. The silence that followed was heavy. The air conditioner hummed. Brandon sat alone on his side of the table. The bluster was gone. The arrogance had evaporated. He looked across the table at me, his eyes wide and wet. Dad, he whispered. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a deep, aching exhaustion. But I knew I couldn't stop now. If I stopped now, everything I had done would be for nothing. We will see you in court for the final judgment. Brandon, I said. I turned and walked out, leaving him sitting there with the emails that proved he had been a liar long before he became a failure. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing him in with the consequences of his own words. The door clicked shut behind the cheap lawyer, leaving a silence in the room that was louder than any scream. My son sat across from me, slumped in his chair like a marionette whose strings had been cut. He looked at the empty seat where his legal defense used to be, and then he looked at me. His eyes were hollow. For the first time in his life, Brandon wasn't looking at me with entitlement or arrogance. He was looking at me with fear. He was seeing the abyss, and he knew I was the only one holding a rope. Holloway remained silent, tapping his pen rhythmically on the table. It was the only sound in the room, tap, tap, tap. It sounded like a countdown. Brandon wiped his nose with the back of his hand. So that is it then, he whispered, his voice cracking. You are going to ruin me. You are going to take everything. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the scarred wood of the table. I looked him in the eye. I didn't see a 32-year-old man. I saw the messy, scared kid who used to break things and try to hide the pieces under the rug. I don't want to ruin you, Brandon, I said softly. And frankly, I don't want your money. We both know you don't have it. Even if I seize your assets, the bank will take the car, the landlord will take the apartment, and the taxman will take the rest. I would be fighting for scraps. Brandon blinked, confused. Then why do this? Why humiliate me? Because sometimes you have to burn the field to save the soil, I said. I destroyed your financial life because it was built on a lie. But I am willing to give you a chance to build a real one. I reached into my jacket pocket. I didn't pull out another lawsuit. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a legal document. It was a handwritten note. I slid it across the table. There is a way out, Brandon. A clean slate. I will forgive the entire debt. The $482,000. The interest. The legal fees. I will wipe it all away. I will withdraw the lawsuit today. Brandon stared at the paper. He couldn't believe it. Hope flared in his eyes, desperate and pathetic. Really, he asked. You would do that, Dad, thank you. I promise I will pay you back eventually. I will get a new job. I held up my hand to stop him. There are conditions, I said. 2 of them, and they are non-negotiable. Brandon nodded eagerly. Anything. I'll do anything. I'll mow your lawn. I'll paint the house. I don't need a gardener, Brandon. I need a father for my grandson. I pointed to the paper. Condition number 1. You will fight for full custody of Leo. You will argue that his current living situation is unstable, which it is. You will move into a small apartment that I have already rented for you. It is modest, it is clean, and it is yours rent-free for 6 months, provided you stay employed. Brandon nodded. Okay, I can do that. I want Leo. I love him. What is the second condition? I took a breath. This was the hard part. This was the amputation. Condition number 2, I said, my voice hardening. You will divorce Monica. Immediately. The room went cold. Brandon recoiled as if I had slapped him. What? No. Dad. I can't do that. She is my wife. I love her. She is not your wife, Brandon, I said brutally. She is a tumor. She has been feeding off you for 5 years. She isolated you from your family. She spent money you didn't have. And when the ship started sinking 3 days ago, did she grab a bucket? No. She grabbed her yoga mat and ran. She was scared, Brandon protested, his face turning red. She was reacting to the stress. You don't know her like I do. She loves me. We are just going through a hard time. I looked at Holloway. He nodded and opened a slim black folder. He slid a bank statement across the table. I figured you would say that, I said. So I had Holloway do a little digging. We didn't just investigate your finances, Brandon. We investigated hers. Brandon looked down at the statement. What is this? He asked. That is an account with First National Bank, I explained. It is in Monica's maiden name. It was opened 3 years ago. Look at the deposits, Brandon. He scanned the list. $200 here, $500 there, $1,000 transfer. She calls it her emergency fund, I said. Every time you borrowed money from me, every time you got a commission check, every time you thought you were paying bills, she was siphoning off a percentage. I watched his eyes widen as he looked at the balance at the bottom of the page. $52,000, I read aloud. Brandon went quiet. He was doing the math in his head. 6 months ago, I continued, my voice low. You came to me begging for $50,000 to pay off a gambling debt because you said you were terrified Monica would find out. You said it would ruin your marriage. You were crying in my office. Brandon nodded slowly. She had $52,000 sitting in that account, Brandon. While you were weeping and begging your father for a bailout, your wife was sitting on enough cash to save you. And she didn't say a word. She watched you drown. She watched you humiliate yourself. She watched you sign a promissory note that put a noose around your neck. And she kept her money safe. Brandon stared at the paper. His hands started to shake. The denial was fighting a war with the evidence, but the numbers didn't lie. Why, he whispered. Why would she do that? Because she was never betting on you, son, I said. She was betting against you. She was hedging her investment. And 3 days ago, when the money stopped flowing, she didn't call you to offer help. She called a divorce attorney. Holloway slid one last piece of paper across. It was a consultation receipt from a high-end divorce firm dated the morning after the asset freeze. She is already gone, Brandon, I said gently. The only question is, are you going to let her take you down with her? Or are you going to cut the rope? Brandon picked up the receipt. He looked at the date. He looked at the time. It was time-stamped 1 hour after I had frozen the accounts. While he was sitting on the curb in the rain crying, she was already paying a retainer to end their marriage. He made a sound. It was a low, guttural noise like an animal in a trap. He crumpled the receipt in his hand. He closed his eyes and tears squeezed out hot and fast. He remembered the way she looked at him in the hallway. He remembered her saying, I didn't marry a man, I married a potential. He remembered the yellow sticky notes on my furniture. He realized then that he hadn't been a husband. He had been a host organism. He took a deep breath. It was a shuddering, painful breath. But when he opened his eyes, the boy was gone. There was a man sitting there. A broken man, yes, but a man who was finally seeing the world clearly. Where do I sign? Brandon asked. His voice was dead flat and final. I pushed the agreement toward him. I handed him a pen. You are making the right choice, I said. Brandon didn't answer. He just signed his name. It wasn't the arrogant loop he used on the promissory notes. It was a jagged, heavy signature. The signature of someone who was writing the end of one life and the beginning of another. He dropped the pen. "I want my son," he said. "I want Leo. You will get him, I promised, and you will get your dignity back. It might take time, it might hurt, but it will be yours, not something you borrowed, not something you bought. Yours." Brandon stood up. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't hug me. He just nodded a sharp jerk of his chin. "Thank you, Dad," he said. He walked out of the room. He walked straighter than he had in years. He was broke. He was soon to be divorced. He was homeless. But as I watched him go, I knew he was finally free. The parasite had been removed. Now the healing could begin. Time is the only true auditor. It doesn't care about your credit score or your last name. It only cares about what you do with the minutes you are given. For my son Brandon, the last 12 months have been the longest and hardest of his life. But they have also been the most honest. I drove out to the construction site in West Seattle yesterday. It was raining again because this is Seattle, and the sky likes to remind us that nothing is permanent, not even the sun. I parked my truck across the street and watched. The site was for a new mid-rise apartment complex. Mud was everywhere. The noise of jackhammers and diesel engines was deafening. And there, in the middle of it, was Brandon. He wasn't wearing an Italian suit. He was wearing a high-visibility vest over a stained flannel shirt. He wasn't holding a wine glass. He was holding a shovel. I watched him dig. He wasn't just moving dirt. He was working with the rhythm I hadn't seen since he was a teenager playing varsity baseball. He was sweating. His face was smeared with grime. He looked exhausted. But he didn't look hollow. A foreman walked over to him shouting something over the noise of a cement mixer. In the old days, Brandon would have rolled his eyes. He would have made a snide comment under his breath. He would have felt superior to a man in a hard hat. But today, Brandon just nodded. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve and went back to work. He lifted a heavy bag of cement, his muscles straining. He didn't complain. He just did the job. I learned later that he is making $22 an hour. It is less than he used to spend on a single lunch. But every Friday, he takes that paycheck and he pays his own rent on the studio apartment I helped him secure. He pays for his own groceries. He pays for his own bus pass because he still doesn't have a car. And he pays me. Every month, like clockwork, I receive a check for $200. It is a symbolic repayment. I told him he didn't have to, that the debt was forgiven. But he insisted. He said he needed to see the balance go down even if it takes him 100 years. He said he needed to feel the weight of what he borrowed. As for Monica, she vanished as quickly as she arrived. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to Los Angeles less than a week after the divorce papers were signed. Instagram tells the story that reality tries to hide. She is currently dating a producer who is 20 years her senior. She posts photos of herself on yachts and at red carpet events wearing diamonds that probably don't belong to her. She looks happy in that shiny, brittle way that people look when they are running away from themselves. She never asked about Brandon. She never asked about the debt. She certainly never asked about me. She simply molted her old life and slithered into a new one. I don't hate her. I pity her. Because one day she will run out of hosts, and she will have to look in the mirror and see that she has consumed everything around her and is still starving. But Brandon is feeding himself. I watched him take a lunch break. He sat on a stack of drywall opening a plastic container. He wasn't eating Wagyu beef. He was eating a sandwich he made himself. And he wasn't alone. He was laughing with 2 other workers. Real laughter. Not the polite fake chuckle of a boardroom, but the deep belly laugh of a man who has nothing to hide. He saw my truck. He stopped chewing. He stood up. For a second, I thought he might be embarrassed. I thought he might turn away. But he waved. He raised his hand in a simple, tired greeting. I waved back. He pointed to his watch, signaling that he had to get back to work. He didn't come over to ask for money. He didn't come over to complain about his back. He just acknowledged me, respected the distance, and went back to the shovel. That shovel is teaching him more about economics than his business degree ever did. It is teaching him that money represents life energy. It represents time. It represents sweat. When you understand that you don't buy a Porsche to impress people you don't like, you buy a good pair of boots because you have a long walk ahead of you. I started the engine of my truck. I didn't need to stay. I had seen what I needed to see. My son was no longer a millionaire on paper. He was a thousandaire in reality. And for the first time in 32 years, I was proud of him. Not because of what he had, but because of what he had lost and how he was carrying the weight of it. The lake was still that morning, a sheet of glass reflecting the gray clouds that drifted lazily overhead. I sat on the wooden dock, my legs dangling over the edge, watching the red and white bobber float on the surface of the water. Next to me, Leo held his small fishing rod with a seriousness that made me smile. He wasn't checking a tablet. He wasn't asking for a video game. He was just watching the water, learning the ancient art of patience. It has been a year since I declared war on my own son. A year since I decided that being a father meant being the villain in his story, so that he could eventually become the hero in his own. People often talk about unconditional love as if it means unconditional acceptance of bad behavior. They think love is a soft blanket that you wrap around your children to protect them from the cold. But I have learned that sometimes love is the cold. Sometimes love is the wind that strips away the dead leaves so that new growth can begin. I looked at Leo. He is growing up in a different world than his father did. He lives in a small apartment now. He sees his dad come home tired with dirt under his fingernails. He sees his dad budget for groceries. And because of that, Leo is learning the value of $1 before he even learns long division. He is learning that respect is something you build with your hands, not something you buy with a credit card. Brandon is not the man I thought he would be. He is better. He is quieter. He listens more than he speaks. The arrogance that used to coat him like cheap varnish has been sanded away by the friction of real life. He is raw, but he is real. And for the first time when he looks at me, he doesn't see a bank. He sees a man. I reeled in my line, a little feeling the resistance of the water. There is a ledger in my safe that is finally balanced. The debt is paid not in money, but in character. I realized that the greatest inheritance I can leave behind is not the house or the stocks or the vintage furniture. It is the lesson that you are only entitled to what you create. It is the understanding that rock bottom is the strongest foundation you can build on. Leo's bobber dipped below the surface. He gasped, his eyes wide with excitement. "Grandpa, I got one," he shouted. I didn't reach over to take the rod. I didn't offer to reel it in for him. I sat back and watched him struggle, watched him focus, watched him figure it out. "You got this, Leo," I said softly. "It's all you." And as I watched him pull that fish from the water, flashing silver in the dull light, I knew that the Reed legacy was safe. Not because of what I gave them, but because of what I refused to give. In the end, the cruelest thing I ever did was the kindest thing I ever did. I stopped saving my son so that he could finally learn how to save himself. I learned that the checkbook is the worst parenting tool a father can use. Real love isn't about shielding your children from every storm. It is about teaching them how to build their own shelter. By cutting Brandon off, I didn't abandon him. I gave him back his dignity. He hated me for the demolition, but he loves me for the renovation. To all the parents listening, do not be afraid to be the villain in their short-term story if it means being the hero in their long-term life. A true legacy isn't what you leave for them. It is what you leave in them. If you agree that respect must be earned and not inherited, hit that like button. Have you ever had to use tough love to save a family member? Tell me your story in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and redemption. See you in the next video.